Alright class, so now we are going to look at the antidiuretic hormone and we will talk about how this antidiuretic hormone or ADH plays a role in homeostasis. Alright, now there are two stimuli that triggers ADH secretion from the posterior pituitary. The first one is dehydration. If you are dehydrated, you have more solute concentration and less water in the plasma. So, or if you have low blood volume, so if you have just low blood volume in your body, either one will trigger ADH synthesis. Now, who senses it? Who takes care of business here? Well, first, there are some sensors, and these sensors are called osmoreceptors, which are present in the hypothalamus. I have drawn the osmoreceptors in yellow here. So these are osmoreceptors. Okay, what do they sense? Okay, what happens exactly is that I'll just draw with a different color. There is a blood vessel associated here. Okay, and let's say you are dehydrated. You are dehydrated. So again, your plasma osmolality is high. So you have high osmolality. Okay. Now, under this situation, when you are dehydrated and you have high osmolality, what happens is the solutes that are in blood will suck up water from these osmoreceptors, and as a result, the osmoreceptors will shrink. One more time. When there is high plasma osmolality, the solutes in the plasma will suck up water from these osmoreceptors, and the osmoreceptors will shrink in size. So as these osmoreceptors shrink, that tells the supraoptic nucleus right here, that tells the supraoptic nucleus, dude, something is wrong. This person is dehydrated. We need to do something. So then the supraoptic nucleus causes the posterior pituitary to release a hormone called ADH. Where is ADH produced? Remember, ADH is produced right here in the supraoptic nucleus, and then the ADH is transported and stored in the posterior pituitary, right? So this ADH will be released from the posterior pituitary into the bloodstream. So let's take a look in the next slide. So ADH will be, again, the supraoptic nucleus is here, which produces ADH, and the ADH is stored here. And when the osmoreceptors are stimulated, the ADH is released from the posterior pituitary into the bloodstream. Great. The ADH will eventually travel via blood, and it will come and work on the distal convoluted tubule. It will also work on the, it'll work on the collecting duct and also on the distal convoluted tubule. So these are the two target sites for ADH. And then ADH will cause these two places to reabsorb more water from the filtrate, which will eventually help to increase blood volume and blood osmolality. How does this take place? Let's take a look at the molecular level. So right here, what I have drawn is a blood vessel, and this blood vessel is having obviously blood, and then there are ADH molecules. I'll just draw some ADH here. So these are the cute ADH molecules, which comes from posterior pituitary. Now, and on the other side, I have drawn the collecting duct, which is lined by simple cells, as you can see in purple. And I want you to notice one thing. On the surface of these cells, do you see green colored receptors? So these are ADH receptors. And within these cells, do you see blue colored things? These are called vesicles. These are vesicles that carry aquaporins. Aquaporins are nothing but channels that can that can transport water. So that carry aquaporins. Aquaporins are these orange little things. Okay. So one more time, let's review. We have ADH in the blood vessel. We get this. In the collecting duct, we do see the cells that are lining the collecting ducts, that are the cells that are lining the collecting duct. They have ADH receptors, and within these cells there are some vesicles that carry aquaporins. What are aquaporins again? They are nothing but water channels. Water channels. Now let's play. So this ADH will come and it'll come out of the capillary and it will bind. It'll bind to the receptor. Perfect, perfect, perfect. So we have ADH, my drawing. ADH coming out and binding to the receptor. Make sense? As ADH binds to the receptors, that causes these vesicles to fuse with the plasma membrane as shown here. So we have ADH bound here. We have ADH bound here, and that caused those vesicles to bind with the plasma membrane or to fuse with the plasma membrane. And as those vesicles fused with the plasma membranes, look what happened to aquaporins. So we have these aquaporins now inserted into the membrane, right? Okay, what will happen now? So these aquaporins will cause water to move from the filtrate. So these aquaporins will cause water to move from the filtrate into the interstitial space, and then from the interstitial space water will enter the capillary, right? And that therefore we get more water into the bloodstream, and obviously that will lead to higher blood volume and that will dilute down the salt, right? So our osmolality will decrease and we will have more blood volume. Does it make sense? So let's review this one more time. So in response to dehydration or low blood volume, the when there is low blood volume or when we are a little dehydrated, there are specific osmoreceptors on the hypothalamus that shrink in size. Why do they shrink? Because they lose water to the hypertonic environment. And as they shrink, that triggers the supraoptic nucleus of the hypothalamus. And as a result of that, the posterior pituitary releases antidiuretic hormone into the bloodstream. The antidiuretic hormone then travels all the way to the kidneys and it binds to specific receptors on the surface of the collecting duct. This causes certain vesicles within the cells that line the collecting duct to fuse with the membrane and insert aquaporins or water channels onto the surface of the collecting duct. Via these aquaporin molecules, water comes out of the filtrate and then ultimately enters the blood capillary. This is how water is reabsorbed from the filtrate and enters our blood stream. This ultimately results in a more concentrated urine. Why? Because we are taking out water at this point. Make sense? All right. So this is a chart. I just want you to go over this chart on your own. It talks about the stimulus for the release of antidiuretic hormone. I leave this to you to study. And then this is another little flowchart showing what causes release of ADH. So it's talking about the negative feedback loop and how it is corrected. Again, it's really straightforward. At this point, you should be able to read it and understand it. All right, moving on to another hormone called aldosterone. We have talked about aldosterone before, right? It doesn't harm to review this one more time super quick. When we have low blood pressure, remember that triggers the JG cells or the juxtaglomerular cells to release renin. Renin then flows through blood, goes to liver and converts angiotensinogen to angiotensin 1, which is then converted to angiotensinogen 2 by an enzyme called ACE in lungs. Remember? Angiotensin 2 then comes to adrenal cortex and tells the adrenal cortex to release aldosterone. Aldosterone works on the distal convoluted tubule mostly to reabsorb. This helps in reabsorption of sodium. And as sodium is reabsorbed, remember, water follows, osmosis. All right, let's take a look. So what do we have here? We have capillary, and within this capillary, we do see aldosterone. This is aldosterone floating around. Now remember, aldosterone is a steroid hormone. Do you remember that? It's a steroid hormone. Therefore, aldosterone will come out. It'll cross the plasma membrane of the principal cell of the distal convoluted tubule. So the gray cell is a cell of the distal convoluted tubule. Aldosterone will come all the way in and it'll bind to specific receptors for aldosterone. So it comes and binds right here. Honestly, these should be yellow. Let me do this in yellow. Okay. So aldosterone binds to specific receptors. We get this. Now binding of aldosterone to these receptors will trigger a few things. First, it will trigger formation of sodium channels. So there will be sodium channels inserted. It will also cause formation of some potassium channels to be inserted. All right, fine. Was a big deal. Now on this side we have our favorite. We have our sodium potassium pump. Sodium potassium pump. What will this do? The sodium potassium pump will get rid of 3 sodium and will take in 2 potassium. Right? Okay. Since it's pumping out sodium from the distal convoluted tubule, and remember we have the lumen here, right? That's the lumen. We have the filtrate here. Since it's pumping out sodium from these cells, obviously there is deficit of sodium within the principal cell. So now sodium will come in. Sodium from the filtrate comes in, right? And then this sodium will ultimately get into the capillary. Now, another thing that I want you to notice is that potassium is coming in, and these potassium molecules will then leak out via these channels. Therefore, aldosterone mainly causes sodium to be reabsorbed from the lumen, and ultimately the sodium gets pumped into the capillary by the sodium potassium pump. Another effect of aldosterone is increase of potassium secretion, or potassium leaks into the filtrate. So by this process, by the action of aldosterone, we lose potassium into the filtrate. And remember, as sodium comes in, water follows. So we will have water coming in, and then water will ultimately go into the capillaries. That's it.